Parashah 7, Vayitzi, he went out. Today, our Parashah readings extended beyond the normal end of the weekly Parashah to include the whole of chapter 32, most of which, of course, forms the part of next week's Parashah. My reason for doing that was because Jacob, had two encounters with El Shaddai, whom we now know, of course, is Yahweh, the God of his grandfather Abraham and his father Yitzhak. The first encounter was on his journey out of the land of Canaan, and the latter, of course, occurs at the time he is approaching the land on his return journey. Now, both encounters were reminders to Yaakov that it is through him alone that all the land of Canaan that Yahweh had promised to both his father and his grandfather would become an eternal inheritance of their descendants. Therefore, it is important to tie these two events together, because together they show that Yahweh was always with Yaakov, and perhaps more importantly, that his responsibility was to be the third patriarch through whom Yahweh would call his chosen people Israel. Now, turning back to the beginning of this week's Parashah, we see that Yaakov, having deceived his father Yitzhak, by taking the firstborn birthrights instead of his brother Esau, meant that he was now having to embark on this journey back to the land of his family of origin to find himself a suitable wife. As we saw in last week's Parashah, Esau, having married two local women, caused considerable grief of spirit to both his father and mother. Further, Yahweh had made it abundantly clear to Abraham that the one vested with the responsibility of patriarchal leadership of the family should never marry into the families of the local nations residing in the land at that time. So Yaakov was travelling from Beersheba to Haran, which is where his family of origin was established. Then, on maybe the first night of his journey, he lay down to sleep and falls into a dream, where he sees the ladder extending from earth to heaven, with angels ascending and descending. Yaakov was not told the significance of the angels on the ladder. In fact, nowhere in the Torah is the ladder even mentioned. It is not until we come to the words of Yeshua, as we read this morning, when he is speaking to one of his Talmudim, namely Nathanael, that he said that in the future he would see greater things, saying, "Yes, indeed I tell you, that you will see heaven opened and the angels going up and down on the Son of Man." Such was the significance of that ladder, but it was not for Yaakov to know the role it would play in the Olam Haba, or the age to come. Instead, Yahweh reaffirmed the promise that he had previously made regarding the land in chapter 28, verses 13 to 15, where the narrative says, "Suddenly Yahweh was standing there next to him, and he said, 'I am Yahweh, the God of Abraham, your grandfather, and the God of your father Yitzhak. The land on which you are lying I will give to you and your descendants. Your descendants will be as numerous as the grains of dust on the earth. You will expand to the west, to the east, to the north, and to the south. By you, and all your descendants, all the families of the earth will be blessed. Look, I am with you, and I will guard you wherever you go, and I will bring you back into this land, because I won't leave you until I have done what I have promised you.'" Those words from Yahweh, who appeared to Yaakov as El Shaddai, not only applied to Yaakov, the man himself, but also to all his descendants, right down through to the end of the restorative period of Yeshua's rain. And that is the time, of course, when the adversary will finally be destroyed, and all faithful and trusting humanity will again be returned and given access to Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden. Those words spoken to Yaakov in his dream are still of profound importance, particularly at this present time, while the people of Israel are under yet another attack from the adversary through the human form of Hamas. What Yahweh promised to Yaakov that night, so long ago, is still to be completely fulfilled through Yeshua after he returns to rule and reign. Realizing that he had been speaking with the God of the universe, Yaakov took the stone pillow and made it a standing stone, which he anointed with oil, and he renamed the place Beit El, House of God. And going on from there, he also said, "This is the gate of heaven." Yaakov then completed his acknowledgement of the content of the dream by making a vow before Yahweh, saying, "If God will be with me and will guard me on the road that I am traveling, giving me bread to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return to my father's house in peace, then Yahweh will be my God. And this stone, which I have set up as a standing stone, will be God's house, and everything you give me, I will faithfully return 1/10 to you." Through those words, Yaakov was making a vow before Yahweh. He was doubtless becoming aware of the depth of the error that he had made in deceiving his father and his brother. And now he's asking Yahweh to return him safely back to his father's house in peace. But little did he know that his return would not occur for another 20 years. That day, he also made a commitment to return 1/10 of everything he had gained to Yahweh, everything that was going to come his way on his journey through life. His commitment was to give 1/10, which became, of course, the foundation for the level of all giving that was to be adopted in the structure of Israel as a nation throughout all the subsequent generations. What is also apparent is not stated was that he was about to depart from Canaan and enter into the territory of the north of the Euphrates River. He was moving from the territory that Yahweh had claimed as his own and was moving into the land directly under the control of the adversary, Satan. So he needed protection of the angels who would guard him while he was traveling outside of the land of Yahweh. What he had seen in his dream with the angels ascending and descending was actually a changing of the guard. His protecting angel who had guided him all his time in Canaan was now being replaced by another angel for the duration of the time that he would be staying in Haran. So moving forward, we do not have time to consider all that occurred in the time he was with his uncle Lavan, his mother's brother. So we had to leap forward to chapter 31, where, having worked for Lavan for 20 years, Yaakov realized that he was then far more wealthy than his now father-in-law Lavan. Overhearing a conversation, or having been told what was said between the sons of Lavan, Yaakov realized that what lay ahead was going to become a dangerous situation. Doubtless the sons of Lavan were plotting against him because they were seeing their inheritance rapidly disappearing into the hands of their cousin Yaakov. Finally, in chapter 31, verse 3, Yahweh gives Yaakov an instruction: "Return to the land of your ancestors, to your kinsmen. I will be with you." Then in verses 17 and 18, Yaakov got up, put his sons and wives on the camels, and carried off all his livestock, along with all the riches he had accumulated, the livestock in his possession, which he had acquired at Padan Aram, to go to Yitzhak his father in the land of Canaan. Having prepared his family for the return journey, he then faced the reality, of course, that he would meet his brother Esau, who, when Yaakov departed, was seeking to kill him. So what type of reception was he going to receive? In answering that question, we need to move forward to chapter 32, which mostly belongs to the next week's Parashah. But it is important to consider it today because it involves Yaakov's second encounter with Yahweh. Starting in verse 4, as the family was crossing the border into the land of Canaan, Yaakov sent out a messenger ahead of him to his brother Esau. In verse 6, it was all about trying to win the favor and acceptance of his brother. The messenger returns finally and saying, "We went to your brother Esau, and he is coming to meet you with 400 men." With that number of men in tow, Yaakov thought Esau was still most likely insanely angry. Even after 20 years of absence, the battle was inevitable. So he calls upon Yahweh as God of his father and grandfather to support him. He reminds Yahweh of what he had said, "Return to your country, to your kinsmen, and I will do you good." Having sent the family across the Yabak River, he remained on the north side that night. And when a man appeared who wrestled with him until daybreak. So who was that man? He did not reveal his name, but instead he blessed Yaakov and gave Yaakov an additional name, the name of Israel, because you have shown your strength to both God and men and have prevailed. While the narrative gives no specific details about what transpired between the two men, it appears that Yaakov may well have had his whole life flash before his eyes in a dreamlike state while he was struggling with that man. Up to that point in his life, having always been a supplanter, that is, the one who wrongly seized and held the place of his brother's birthright, and later in his dealings with his father-in-law, having outsmarted Lavan, he may well have been confronted with all that he had done throughout life up to that point. It appears that the struggle that Yaakov experienced was being played out both on the physical and the celestial levels, with the unnamed man being the same one who appeared to have visited Avram. He had challenged about how many righteous people should have been needed to prevent the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. As we now know from that occasion, the man who visited Abraham, of course, was the pre-human embodiment of Yeshua. So, it follows that the man who was struggling with Yaakov would also be Yeshua in the same form. That would explain why he would not reveal his name at that point in history. If we assume the encounter was between Yaakov and Yeshua, it matches perfectly with the earlier dream that Yaakov had had at Beit El. Because at Beit El, Yaakov was leaving his home territory of Canaan and heading towards Haran. In the overnight struggle, Yaakov is returning back to that land of Canaan. So having been told in his first encounter in chapter 28:15, "Look, I am with you. I will guard you wherever you go, and I will bring you back into this land, because I won't leave you until I have done what I have promised you." In that second encounter, it is time to remove from Yaakov his supplanter personality and replace it with the leadership characteristics that were needed as the father of the 12 tribes who had become the nation of Israel. because he would be the one to inherit the land of Canaan, and would later, of course, it would be known as Eretz Israel. It was a life-changing encounter for Yaakov, and one that he would look back upon as the point in which he truly became the father of the chosen nation. Shaul also speaks about how all who are called by Yeshua to be his Kohanim must also go through that same life-changing process. As we read in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verses 6 and 7, Shaul said, "There is a wisdom that we are speaking to those who are mature enough for it. But it is not the wisdom of this world or of this world's leaders who are in the process of passing away. On the contrary, we are communicating a secret wisdom from God, which has been hidden until now, but which, before the history began, God had decreed would bring us glory." Those words match perfectly with what Yahweh was promising to Yaakov at Beit El when he said, "I won't leave you until I have done what I have promised." On his deathbed, Yaakov was given wisdom by Yahweh to enable him to pass on to each of his 12 sons. The blessings were given in Parashah chapter 49, and beginning in verses 1 and 2, it says, "Gather yourselves together, and I will tell you what will happen to you when? In the Aharet Hayamim. Assemble yourselves and listen, sons of Yaakov. Pay attention to Israel, your father." The wisdom that Yaakov received through the Ruach HaKodesh enabled him to give those blessings, and which have still remained to a large extent a mystery even till this day. Just as Shaul continues in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verses 8 and 9, not one of this world's leaders has understood it, because if they did, they would not have executed the Lord, from whom all glory flows. But as the Tanakh says, no eye has seen, no ear has heard, no one's heart has imagined all the things that God has prepared for those who love him. So we see from all these words that the total transformation that took place for Yaakov during that overnight struggle. Finally, he became a man ready to be that third patriarch for the people of Israel. Therefore, it is beholden upon any and all who have been called by the Ruach HaKodesh to acknowledge those words of Shaul. We all need to leave behind the ways of the world and recognize that we have been called to intercede on behalf of Israel as God's chosen people. Just as Yaakov had to face the flaws of his own personality during his overnight struggle with that man, so also we need to struggle with Yeshua, who will pave our way forward both in this life and the Olam Haba. Shabbat Shalom.